Buenos dias. Bonjour. Hello, how are you? Howdy. O genki desu ka? Ni hao ma. Guten Tag. Namaste. Namaskaram. Folks, this is going to be a make it or break it episode here on the Aumbonda Soul Soldier podcast. The thematic material of this presentation, I don't know what the fallout's going to be. But that being said, at the onset of this presentation, I wanted to provide something of value to you, the viewer, something that something that you will feel that has been worth your while to have invested thus far. I don't know how many episodes you've watched or whatnot. I mean, but anyway, the first part of the presentation will be some actionable intelligence, that just some simple reminders that every person who wants to live a fulfilling and healthy life, this will be something that we all can use. Now, the latter part of the presentation is where I may lose some people, but we'll just have to cross that bridge when we get there. So anyway, that being said, here's the first part of the presentation. Now, these are 10 biggest brain damaging habits, all right? So, no breakfast. People who do not take breakfast are going to have a lower blood sugar level. This leads to an insufficient supply of nutrients to the brain, causing brain degeneration. Number 2, overeating. It causes hardening of the brain arteries, leading to a decrease in mental power. Number 3, smoking. It causes multiple brain shrinkage and may lead to Alzheimer's disease. And that's just the tip of that dirty blackened lung. High sugar consumption. Too much sugar will interrupt the absorption of proteins and nutrients, causing malnutrition and may interfere with brain functioning. Air pollution. The brain is the largest oxygen consumer in our body. Inhaling polluted air decreases the supply of oxygen to the brain, bringing about a decrease in brain efficiency. Sleep deprivation. Sleep allows our brain to rest. Long-term deprivation from sleep will accelerate the death of brain cells. Not to mention, sleep is the time when most of us get to go visit the starships. Keep that in mind. Head covered while sleeping with the head covered increases the concentration of carbon dioxide. I don't know who does that anymore, but if you're sleeping with your blankets over your head, stop. Okay, folks? You're not going to get on the starship like that, okay? Maybe you'll get into the starship, the sails of Charon, leading to an early death as you cross the river Styx. A little bit of mythological humor, folks. Like I said, you never know what you're going to get here on the Aumbonda podcast. Working your brain during illness. Working hard or studying with sickness may lead to a decrease in effectiveness of the brain as well as damage to the brain. Lacking in stimulating thoughts. Thinking is the best way to train our brain. Lacking in brain stimulation thoughts may cause brain shrinkage. And talking rarely. Intellectual conversations will promote the growth of your brain. Okay, folks? So that's just that's just 10 little kinds of things that you can take home, so you don't feel like you wasted your time too much with this particular episode of the Aumbonda podcast. However, now the second part of this podcast, the thematic material may be, this is where I may lose some people, but just bear with me 1 second. I'm just doing some technical issues here. All righty. Okay, folks. I hope everybody's having a great day so far. All right, so The rapid dying of religion. All right, folks. All right, so we're gonna have to tackle this subject. I'm not saying any of my viewpoints at the onset of this presentation. We're just gonna go through this. I'm just gonna get it out there, and then maybe on the next episode I'll have some commentary on what I think. But I think this is something important to address, and maybe today being Sunday, it's the time to talk about this. So the rapid dying of religion and the rise of universal spirituality. All right, folks. Let's see here. We have some fella, looks like an older gentleman. I'm not sure who that it is. Let's see. When Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders, okay, so I guess that's Bernie Sanders, stepped away from identifying himself with any organized religion and instead asserted that my spirituality is that we are all in this together. He became the first major political figure to identify himself as a practitioner of the growing spiritual but not religious mindset in America. Sanders thus brought to national attention a cultural minority that, if present trends continue, will not be a minority much longer. So in direct contrast to the steady growth of the spiritual but not religious perspective, so I guess that's been branded SBNR, is the precipitously rapid decline of organized religion. The accelerating downturn in church-going and formal religious affiliation occasionally makes the news when new polls about religion are released, but its full significance has yet to be fully recognized. To listen to mainstream news reports about the influence of the religious right in a presidential election campaign is to get the impression that mainstream Christianity is, if not more powerful than ever, at least holding steady in its influence. But research data over the last several decades clearly indicate otherwise. What's going on here? The steady rise of the nuns. The latest evidence of the dying of organized religion issues from a large survey released in 2014 by the Pew Research Center. Among the findings of their religious landscape study was this information as reported by Michael Lipka. Religious nuns, a shorthand we use to refer to people who self-identify as atheists or agnostics, as well as those who say their religion is nothing in particular, now make up roughly 23% of the U.S. adult population. This is a stark increase from 2007, the last time a similar Pew Research study was conducted, when 16% of Americans were nuns. During the same time period, Christians have fallen from 78% to 71%. If this rate of conversion to religious nunhood should continue with a 1% annual increase, then over half of the U.S. population will be religiously unaffiliated in less than 30 years. And the proportion of Christians will likewise fall below 50%. In all likelihood, however, the rate of change to non-religiosity is likely to accelerate because the bulk of current churchgoers is aging out while younger millennials are staying away from church in droves. 35% of those born from 1981 to 1996 identify themselves as nuns. And earlier polls have indicated that around 70% of millennials identify themselves as spiritual but not religious. As Pastor Charles Redfern wrote in the Huffington Post, Sunday attendance in mainline churches is dropping as fast as a bare-naked skydiver. What an interesting analogy, metaphor, I don't know. Turnout in the United Church of Christ has dropped below 1 million. The Episcopal Church estimates its population at 1.8 million, down from 3 million in the 1960s. Membership in the Presbyterian Church USA fell by 46% from 1965 to 2005, and the United Methodists have lost 4.5 million in their American churches since 1964. 4,000 churches close each year, and 3,500 people leave the church each day. Redfern goes on to note, however, that these attendance losses chiefly affect the older mainline denominations, while there has been some growth in non-white and evangelical congregations. Those identifying themselves as evangelicals in America have remained relatively steady at 34 to 35% over the past 7 years. But this proportion is counterbalanced by at least a decade of polls showing that anywhere from 20 to 40% of American adults identify as spiritual but not religious, a category that wasn't even recognized until the last 15 years or so. Factoring in the disconnect. For the really stark numbers on church attendance, however, you have to go to a source with a vested interest, churchleaders.com, a web resource for Christian pastors which describes itself as dedicated to resourcing, informing, and connecting a community of church leaders for greater kingdom impact worldwide. As writer Kelly Shattuck revealed in 7 Startling Facts, an up-close look at church attendance in America, the number of people who actually go to churches is likely much lower than those who say they do. Less than 20% of Americans regularly attend church, half of what the pollsters report, one study revealed. Numbers from actual counts of people in Orthodox Christian churches, Catholic, mainline, and evangelical, show that in 2004, 17.7% of the population attended a Christian church on any given weekend. Another study published in 2005 in the Journal for the Scientific Study of Religion by sociologists C. Kurt Hadaway and Penny Long Marler, known for their scholarly research on the church, backs up these findings. Their report reveals that the actual number of people worshiping each week is closer to the 17.7% figure, 52 million people instead of the pollster reported 132 million, 40%. As those data figures are now over 10 years old, it's probably safe to assume that actual church attendance is no higher and perhaps lower now. As Shattuck commented on the disparity between popular poll reports and the more detailed investigations by actual church researchers, clearly a disconnect between what Americans say and what they actually do in regards to church attendance has created a church culture which in fact may not exist. So, the birth of the spiritual but not religious. Although the phrase spiritual but not religious did not enter common parlance until the last 10 years or so, the attitude itself is at least 3 decades old, as evidenced by a remarkable study conducted in 1988 by the magazine Better Homes and Gardens. Although little noted at the time, the survey on religion, spirituality, and the American family has proved to be historically significant, not only because Better Homes and Gardens is hardly a voice of the counterculture, but even more so because its survey conducted in a pre-online era drew a whopping 80,000 mailed-in responses, far outstripping most public opinion polls to come up with these findings. Some results suggest that respondents' spirituality is strongest on a personal level. The largest group, 62%, say that in recent years they have begun or intensified personal spiritual study and activities, compared to 23% who say they have become closer to a religious organization. 68% say that when faced with a spiritual dilemma, prayer, meditation guides them most, compared to 14% who say the clergy guides them most during such times. Flash forward to 2006, when a Gallup poll found that the proportion of Americans claiming to be spiritual but not religious had risen from 30% to 40% since 1999. Then, in the spring of 2010, another startling survey was released by Lifeway Christian Resources, the research and marketing arm of the Southern Baptist Convention. Again, not exactly a bunch of Zen progressives. Lifeway's research suggested that 72% of the millennial generation identified themselves as more spiritual than religious. As Lifeway president Tom Ranier commented at the time, the continuance of this trend could mean that the millennial generation will see churches closing as quickly as GM dealerships. But what does spiritual mean exactly? The encroaching sea change in American religion may be easier to typify in terms of what is going away rather than what is arriving. After all, we generally know that it means to be religious. What it means to be religious. It means going to church regularly or telling pollsters that you do. It means believing the central myths and tenets of your chosen religion and at least trying to follow its moral principles and commandments. And it often means endorsing and promulgating a wide range of social and political beliefs that may or may not be directly correlated to biblical dogma or religious practice. By contrast, the beliefs and behaviors of the spiritual but not religious crowd can be more difficult to identify and classify, and they may encompass a very wide range of ideas, from the merely unconventional to the out there loopy. And because superstition, hypocrisy, and prejudice are endemic to the human condition, Such unproductive behaviors are just as likely to show up in countercultural spiritual circles as in mainline religion. Nonetheless, there are some significant and largely irreconcilable divergences between traditional religion and the new spirituality that are easy to recognize. They include a reorientation of belief in God out there to experience of the God within. Perhaps the most profound theological shift from conventional religion to contemporary spirituality, a shift heavily influenced by the arrival of Eastern practices in the West, is the release of belief in a paternalistic, innately superior God that sits out there somewhere, judging and controlling the lives of human beings. That belief is replaced by the experience of a God within that represents the highest elements of human potential. Thus, instead of attempting to obey and please God the Father, according to religious rules set down in the Bible or given by one's church, the spiritual aspirant strives to become godlike in his or her attitudes and behaviors. Likewise, the traditional ideas of heaven and hell as real places that represent final destinations of post-life reward or punishment are regarded as metaphors about how we are living our lives in the here and now. As a popular saying in the spiritual but not religious circle puts it, religion is for those who are afraid of going to hell. Spirituality is for those who have been there. A release of guilt and the belief in original sin in favor of advanced self-awareness and transcendent forgiveness. Traditional Christianity identifies human beings as sinful by nature and redeemable only by accepting the grace of Jesus Christ as one's personal Savior. By contrast, modern spiritual paths dispense with the idea of original sin in favor of admitting that while human beings are generally flawed and prone to making mistakes, sometimes very serious ones, their only salvation lies in learning to become more self-aware, responsible, and consistently forgiving. In A Course in Miracles, ACIM, incidentally, I just downloaded tons of Course in Miracle materials. I'm a big fan of A Course in Miracles. Okay, so by far the most popular spiritual but not religious discipline with recent Western roots, forgiveness is in fact the paramount value, expressing in such meditative lessons as forgiveness ends all suffering and loss, and fear binds the world, forgiveness sets it free. Fear binds the world, forgiveness sets it free. The replacement of church-administered religious rituals like confession and communion with spiritual technologies such as meditation, vision quest, and transformative disciplines. And the location shift of godliness from without to within also entails a shift in the methods that are used to maintain and advance one's religious or spiritual life. Instead of following set rituals prescribed by one's church, the modern spiritual seeker is usually engaged in self-directed explorations of higher consciousness, which may entail everything from Zen or Vipassana meditation to the pursuit of vision quests in the wilderness, or with the use of hallucinogenic substances like ayahuasca to transformative disciplines such as the Course or the famed 12 Steps of Addiction Recovery. The release of religion's traditional hostility to science and psychology in favor of multidisciplinary view of reality. At least since the Scopes trial of nearly a century ago, conservative Christianity has been waging a public battle with Darwin's theory of evolution and other broader issues of scientific inquiry and theory. In recent years, religious activists have taken style notes from science and marshaled their own evidence for a Bible-based hypothesis called creationism, instead of arguing for biblical belief alone. But as the growing numbers of atheists and agnostics, nuns, clearly show, this is a battle that religion is steadily losing, especially among younger people. Christianity has also shown a lesser hostility towards psychology and related self-help philosophies, a hostility that was profoundly shaken by the 1978 publication of M. Scott Peck's groundbreaking book, The Road Less Traveled. I have that book, read it. Recommended. This perennial best-selling masterwork of Christian psychotherapy paradoxically became one of the first fundamental texts of the spiritual but not religious movement, which is heavily influenced by the self-help and psychological thinking, especially the work of depth psychologist Carl Jung. SBNR enthusiasts also readily embrace the latest scientific findings in the fields of behavioral psychology, cosmogenesis, and subatomic physics, often with the unfortunate side effect of overusing and abusing the word quantum. Guilty. The surrender of social moralism and religious discrimination in favor of social justice and a universal spirituality, perhaps most distasteful to the younger generation of millennials who are rapidly abandoning conventional Christianity, is the fundamentalist tendency toward dictating sexual and social morals, as well as promising damnation and an eternal afterlife in hell if Christianity is not accepted as the one true religion. Growing up in an era that has seen the murderous effects of similar extremism in Islamic fundamentalists, millennials seem to favor a secular acceptance of social diversity, economic justice, and belief systems that can flex to meet changing societal conditions. Although those with a spiritual but not religious bent are sometimes accused of navel-gazing, self-absorption, and withdrawal from social and political issues, the movement nonetheless has deep roots in the social activism of the 1960s. And some of its most outspoken proponents, like Marianne Williamson, remain fiercely political, arguably the most prominent popularizer of A Course in Miracles, which advises its students to seek not to change the world, but choose to change your mind about the world. Williamson ran for Congress unsuccessfully in 2014 and has lobbied for the formation of a cabinet-level peace department to counter the massive defense department and the military-industrial complex. She also currently supports the Democratic Socialist campaign of Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton, with whom she consulted in the early days of the Bill Clinton presidency, before that administration became nervous about being associated in public with the so-called New Age movement that substantially overlaps the SBNR following. These five divergences between being traditionally religious and spiritual but not religious are broadly drawn, of course. One can just as easily find elements of SBNR and progressive Christianity as one can find strains of fundamentalism and some extremes of New Age cultism. The diverse evolution of contemporary spirituality perspectives has also led to the emergence of paradoxical atheists, who are also veteran practitioners of mindfulness disciplines, notably Sam Harris, the well-known author of both The End of Faith and Waking Up, a guide to spirituality without religion. 5 questions for the spiritually inclined. In the end, what matters more than the substitution of one set of beliefs for another is whether any of our beliefs and practices actually serve to transform us. Because whether you believe you are a sinner who must surrender to the saving grace of Jesus, or an innately light-filled child of God who's struggling to recognize your inner perfection, the name of the game in religion and spirituality is positive transformation, changes for the better in our self-awareness, behaviors, and ways of relating. As a practitioner of spiritual but not religious for some 30 odd, sometimes very odd years, with a personal focus on the study and practice of the forgiveness-driven Course in Miracles, I've devised 5 questions to serve as a test of value in following any spiritual but not religious quest. Over the years, I've periodically reviewed these queries to check my own progress, as well as publishing them in the hopes they are useful to others. 1, have I become more at peace within myself and in my relationships since undertaking my chosen spiritual discipline? 2, do I blame less and have more compassion about my own difficulties and those of others? 3, do I progressively experience more joy, empathy, and revelatory insight? 4, is my social and political conscience more informed and effective, regardless of how my forms of activism may have changed? Do I sometimes tap transcendent state of consciousness through the natural means of my own trained and focused awareness? For more information and guidance on SBNR practices, see the author's workshops. There you have it, folks. That's Dr. Patrick Miller, the author of this particular work. And so that was just, just kind of an indication of where I'm probably going to go with my next couple of, presentations. But, that's just to give some people some context and not catch anyone by surprise. But anyway, I hope everyone's having a great Sunday, and namaste, namaskaram.